15 seconds. About 10 seconds. 3, 2, 1, 1 second. Yeah, the graphic's been up for 15 minutes. Okay, it's not changing. Ah, there it is.
Welcome to Get It Growing. My name is Janae Foley. I'm a Lafayette Parish Master Gardener, and today we are delighted to have with us a man who almost needs no introduction, Dan Gill with the Lsu Ag Center. Dan has been our guest before, and if you've ever seen him speak, you know you always learn a lot. Dan is the author of the 2 books, Month by Month Gardening in Louisiana and the Louisiana Gardener's Guide. And you know, we are, and we've said this before, we're so fortunate to have books about gardening in Louisiana. You used to pick up garden guides and see these beautiful pictures of things that we couldn't do. But now we have available to us Louisiana gardening guides, and Dan has brought a copy of the new LSU Get It Growing calendar.
Yes, this is a great calendar for 2008. We use all kinds of wonderful information in addition to the really fabulous photographs. You can see these brilliant, just inspiring photographs. And for every month there's a listing of points and tips that people need to know to keep up with their gardening chores. These are available through the Extension Office, the Lsu Ag Center Extension Office here in Lafayette. And you can also get it from the Lsu Ag Center website, and that's at www.lsuagcenter.com. And again, a wonderful Christmas gift. It's about $11.95 and a great little gardening calendar.
And especially, I love to give it to friends who are beginning gardeners because it prompts you. You know, when you're beginning, you are so overwhelmed about when do I do this and is it time to do this. And this, I gave several last year, and they were well used.
Great.
So keep those in mind for your holiday gift giving.
I should mention that the main article this year is on growing herbs. And
Wonderful.
A lot of people who like to grow herbs in the area will find a helpful article on that, plus some diagrams and information on freezing and drying herbs as well. So it's chock-a-block full of all kind of good information.
Right, and beautiful too on top of it. We are arriving in the fall season, as you may have noticed in our background in the studio, maybe a little bit more than outside in the warm weather, but the time to plant or start thinking about planting your spring bulbs is here.
Yeah, you know, gardeners sometimes get used to this whole idea that we can dash out to the nursery on a Saturday morning and load up the car full of beautiful bedding plants and flowers and come home and just create an instant flower garden. And we can do that with bedding plants. But when it comes to spring flowering bulbs, you really have to plan in advance. And planting these little uninspired looking bulbs this time of the year is what provides us that beautiful display in late February, March, and April of next year. So although we won't see the flowers off of these for some time in many cases, this is the time to be thinking about getting them in the ground.
And after today's program, you're going to know exactly which ones you want to go shopping for and get planted in your yard. Absolutely. Dan, I think, has
well, we've got
daffodils to begin with.
Nice selection here. We've got a variety of different kinds of daffodil and narcissus growing in this area. Now, daffodils and narcissus are basically the same thing. Narcissus cultivars tend to have smaller flowers and clusters. Daffodils tend to produce large flowers with lots of big trumpets on them, singly on stems. Now, these can be planted this month through early December without any prior treatment. These bulbs are planted about 5 inches deep in the ground. We don't plant bulbs quite as deeply here in the south as we plant them further north. So make sure you don't plant the bulbs too deeply. Quality matters, and when you're buying bulbs in bags like this, it's a good idea to look carefully through the bag at the quality of the bulbs that you're getting. Now, I took a bulb from this bag and a bulb from this bag, and you can see a really dramatic difference in the size of these bulbs. When it comes to spring flowering bulbs, the larger bulbs and the better quality bulbs are certainly going to provide a much better display for you in the spring. So it's a good idea to buy the largest bulbs that you can, reasonably afford, and the bigger the bulbs, the better display you're going to get. It just so happens that most narcissi and daffodils will bloom pretty well for us. So if you start with small bulbs, over the years they'll get some size on them. But other bulbs, like these hyacinths, for instance, we'll get one good year out of hyacinths, and so you need to make sure that you get a nice big bulb to get that great flower in that first spring.
And let's do for the daffodils, tell people after they finished blooming, this is the important part, to leave that foliage on them, because these bulbs that you're are buying actually made that tiny little flower bud months and months and months ago. So I know it looks tacky. It drives a lot of people crazy to have this yellowing foliage. I mean, plant them, underplant them if it bothers you that much, you know. Plant them with daylilies. Plant them with a ground cover that sort of hides it, and you can kind of push it down a little bit as long as it's there. But don't braid it, don't twist it. Just let it do its natural job, which is producing the tiny little flower bud for the next year.
Indeed, the foliage that comes up on these bulbs, and it oftentimes comes up during the wintertime. So I do tell people, don't be alarmed if you see the bulbs beginning to send up foliage in December or early January. The foliage is quite hardy. But after it finishes flowering, you're right, people are ready to just cut it down and move on. But the food that is stored in this bulb is created strictly by the foliage, and by leaving it to turn slightly yellow before you cut it back, or really yellow before you cut it back, is the best.
Yeah.
That's going to make sure you get a big plump bulb, and that's going to ensure good flowering. We have some paper whites here as well. This is one of the very best of the reblooming narcissus cultivars that we grow. They can be forced. We've got them here in a little container with some pebbles, showing how they can be forced in pebbles. They're also very easy to plant right into the garden. They will come up and bloom usually pretty early. Paper white's one of the earliest of the spring flowering bulbs, and will actually bloom in wintertime, sometimes in late December or January. And so a really wonderful bulb that comes back year after year, providing these fragrant white flowers in the landscape if you force them. I like the fragrance. There are people out there that just hate the fragrance of paper white, so you'll know when you smell them which category you belong to.
You're in. And if you're forcing them, you're going to just put water up to the bottom of your basal plate. You're not submerging the whole bulb in water. Just get some water right up there to the bottom of your bulb, and it's going to start throwing out little white roots. It's not any water, I didn't know, in transporting it.
Settle them in there.
But you settle them in there and just keep, and you do need to keep them, most of us don't have enough sunlight in our homes, so you really need to keep it outside until they're ready to open, or they're going to flop on you. I've seen people grow them in the hurricane lamps for that reason, because the foliage tends to start flopping on you right about the time that they're getting ready to bloom.
And the temperature as well. It's so warm, we keep our houses comfortable for us, and in the 70s these bulbs will stretch as well.
Right.
And so I strongly recommend people put them outside in a sunny spot and leave them outside no matter how cold it gets. Leave them outside unless it's going to get down below 30 degrees. And if it's getting below 30 degrees, just put them in the garage overnight or give them a little protection. And when they begin to show color in their buds, that's when you bring them inside the house and enjoy those wonderful flowers at that point. Not hard to do, and a great project for kids as well as adults.
Yeah, I like doing it. I still like doing it. And we also brought, these are Caladium bulbs that I dug up last week, and of course have done nothing else with them, but I did get them out of the ground. Just as a reminder to you that if you have not dug your caladiums while you can still find where they are, you still got some tacky foliage there, go get them out of the ground so that they don't rot. If we have a rainy winter, you're in danger of losing them, and you can grow them year after year, getting them larger and larger, but you do have to get them out of the ground. So if you haven't gotten your caladiums out, go dig them this afternoon. It's a gorgeous day. That'd be a great project.
I usually wait too late on mine. You get busy with other stuff. But really the ideal time is when you still have foliage showing that's kind of yellow and floppy, but lots of foliage so you know where those tubers are and you can dig them up easier. But goodness, now is definitely, this weekend I've got one last bed to do. Right. So I'll be getting those up and out of the way.
And we've got a little sweetie here that we wanted to talk about. Dan was telling me that this plant has changed names 3 or 4 times, and I was telling him I really don't care. It's one of those little plants. I don't care what its name is. When they decide, finally on the name, we'll put the correct name on it. But it's a little sweetheart of a plant that we'll have at the festival. That was an LSHR release. It's coral, almost the color of my shirt, with a little yellow at the throat, and it reseeds. Its name used to be Spiraxis. Right now it's Anamotheca laxa, and Dan was telling me 2 other names.
Laparusia, and
right,
the latest
Laparusia,
I have found is Freesia laxa.
Which kind of you can see too. It makes a little coral bloom. There's going to be about 75 or 100 little blooms. It makes a clump, fairly in a fairly short period of time, and it's going to make little seedlings. Not, you know, it's not going to go all over your garden, but enough that you can make a nice little border with them and pass them along to friends. It's a really neat little bulb.
Well, it is a pass-along plant. Are y'all going to be offering this at any of your sales, do you think?
That's what I'm saying. At the festival, at the flower festival in April, this is one that's
You're
already
propagating them already.
We're already propagating them.
Y'all keep that in mind, because this is a pass-along bulb. You really can't
You
find it.
can't find it in the trade.
If you type the Latin name into the internet and on a search engine, you may find a source that deals with rare bulbs. But boy, a traditional plant, people have been growing this for generations in the South. Once you got it, you always have it, and it's so sweet. It is indeed.
And you can share it. That's the nice thing too. You know, you got wonderful memories of people that gave you plants. That some of them, you know, aren't even with us anymore,
Sure.
but you still think of them every time you walk past that plant.
Well, I picked up these hyacinths a little bit ago, and I did want to mention a couple of things when it comes to these great plants. For one thing, when you buy bulbs in bags like this, it's a good idea, I think, personally, to buy bags of individual colors. And that allows you to select just the colors that you're looking for and combine just the colors you want to combine. When you buy a mixed bag like this, the colors may not go real well together necessarily, and the bed may not have the impact that if you just planted a single color. So first off, if it's me, I buy different bags of single colors and I combine them together the way I want to. The other thing I want to say about the hyacinths as well as tulips, and that's important for these two types of bulbs. Our climate is too mild. Our winters are too warm to give these bulbs the amount of cold they need in the wintertime to develop their flower buds properly. So we have to artificially lengthen the winter. We buy them in November, put them in the vegetable bin of our refrigerators, and leave them in their net bag. Make sure the bag they're in breathes. You want to make sure that it's not a sealed plastic container or a plastic bag. In that vegetable bin where you store these, don't put any fruit in there with them. Apples and pears and peaches, they give off a hormone gas called ethylene, and that will make your bulbs bloom abnormally. So just keep them well labeled so nobody eats them. They're not onions. And also make sure that, you don't put any fruit in there. We pull these out around about the last week of December, first week of January, once our soil has had a chance to get nice and cold, and we plant them then. Now, tulips give us one great spectacular bloom and rarely rebloom again this far south. Hyacinths, on the other hand, will generally rebloom for several years, but you'll never again see these fat, luscious spikes they had the first year. In future years, you'll get little small spikes, but the flowers are still wonderfully fragrant, provide a bit of color, and so my mom, for one, always leaves her hyacinths in place and lets them bloom again.
And well, let's talk a little bit about forcing these too. You can do the same thing with the hyacinths that you can with the paper white. As a matter of fact, probably some of your grandmothers and aunts have the little hyacinth forcing jars. That it's a good project for kids too, because the roots will, you know, extend about 6 inches down into the water, and the neck is crumped to support your bulb. Now, and that too, after you've forced them, just pitch them, because they're not going to come back. You know, people have a hard time doing that, but I tell them, look, you've gotten as much show out of it as you had cut flowers. Go pitch them under your azalea and let them compost, because they're not going to come back.
And they force very easy in a window, like a kitchen picture window or anywhere along those lines. The fragrance is amazingly wonderful. One time I was going to force these in water, and I didn't have a bulb vase. And bulb vases are pinched like an hourglass, and you put the bulb in the top and the roots grow down in the bottom part. Didn't have one, so I just got a regular glass, filled it with water, and I took a hyacinth bulb. You're going to laugh at me.
No.
I took a hyacinth bulb and I put 3 toothpicks in it, like you do the avocado pit, and then I suspended it over the glass with the bottom lower part in the water, and I kept the water at that level. Don't you know they bloom just fine?
Sure.
That's how tough and easy it is for these bulbs to be forced indoors, and I recommend it.
Yeah, another great project for kids too. Get those kids gardening young. And the Dutch iris. Yeah, I know you've been a big proponent of these little bulbs lately.
Because a lot of the spring flowering bulbs do not repeat bloom real well for us. We've already talked about tulips not repeating bloom real well. But Dutch irises repeat bloom very well for us. Now the flowers are lovely. A lot of people compare the flowers to orchids. They're just such a complex, beautiful little flower. But the foliage is less inspiring. It's very narrow and grassy. And so when planting Dutch irises, it's a good idea to make sure you put them in a nice clump And I oftentimes like to put some foliage behind them, like put them in front of a shrub or put some other nice plants around them because the foliage just doesn't, do a whole lot for the garden. But again, when these finish blooming, you leave them in place, let the foliage ripen, turn yellow, cut it back, leave them alone. They'll come back every year and bloom beautifully for you.
Yes, after you had spoken, I guess, a couple of years ago, and we put some in the demo garden, a little bicolor, purple and yellow. It's absolutely a little pastel color, but same thing among the daylilies, where it comes up, you've got the show, and then the foliage is hidden.
I think that's a great idea, combining it with daylilies, because the foliage is a little similar. Boy, you just gave me a great idea.
Well, good, good.
And you got snowflakes.
Absolutely, Dan and I both love this little bulb. If you haven't, ever planted the summer snowflakes, you really have to fancy them. And you've noticed these. You may not have known the name of them. It's a little delicate white flower with a green dot on each petal, and the foliage is a stunning green. And you've seen these around old homes, circling trees. A lot of time they'll grow in the sun or the shade, but just an absolute little sweetheart of a plant.
Well, and the way these little bells dangle down, to me, I always say it reminds me of lily of the valley on steroids. It's such a big, robust plant, but it has that delicate look to it. And again, you will not find a spring flowering bulb that reblooms any better here in the Deep South than these leucojums or snowflakes. The foliage comes back every year in the wintertime. They produce these gorgeous flowers, usually around about April, and then they just go dormant for the summer and get out of the way. But every year, as easy as anything, they come right back for you and rebloom.
Now, this is another little sweetie, too, that I dug up. They're hard to find. To get one of these, you are going to have to find a friend, a neighbor, an acquaintance that has one. They're the little campanelles, which are a little, almost, they look like a miniature daffodil, but the foliage is more reed-shaped. They're an old bulb. Hard, the same thing. The only place you're going to get them is pass along in all probability. But they're just one of the first things up in late February. When the weather's still so bleak, they'll shoot up and you've got those little dainty yellow bulbs. So see, if you can find some campanelles somewhere, you really want campanelles for your garden too.
It's a real bit of southern gardening history there. Now, when I'm looking for old bulbs, there are a couple of companies I'll usually check. Brent and Becky Bulbs, and they have a great website, so you can just type that into your favorite search engine. So I'll go check Brent and Becky for one, and then Old House Bulbs. They specialize in the old heirloom bulbs as well. So if you're trying to find an old type of bulb that's just fallen out of the trade, sometimes you can, if you look hard enough.
If you look hard enough.
But there's nothing like getting a plant from a friend.
And the Southern Bulb Company. He spoke at our conference.
Absolutely.
A young gardener from Texas that's going into the heirloom bulb business, which is great to see too. And this is a little sweetie. The same thing. Some of these, you're not going to go out to your local garden centers, but another narcissus called Grand Primo, and these would be it's another antique bulb. And you see these around Lafayette, which is why I dug one up. It's the white narcissus that's got about 17 blooms in it. They're around a lot of the older homes, and that's it. Go knock on your somebody's door that you haven't necessarily met and ask them if they would share a story. They will be delighted, and they will probably tell you where they got that plant from 50 years ago. Sit down, have a cup of coffee, and meet somebody who's a fellow gardener, and listen to their stories, because some people don't have a chance to tell their stories that much anymore.
And gardeners love to talk about their plants.
I know.
And interesting to note, this has started to grow. You mentioned that you dug it up.
I dug it up.
And again, when you plant these bulbs out this time of the year, it is very typical. The ground is warm.
Right.
You'll see growth come up on them fairly quickly after planting. Do not be alarmed if freezes come. Again, the foliage on these bulbs, super hardy. You never have to worry about that.
Yeah, Grand Primo and Campanelle are both greening up already.
And this belongs to the paper white group, and again, one of my very, very favorites as well. Boy, you bought some other interesting things here.
This is a new little plant I saw you looking at.
Now, oddly enough, this is one of the spring flowering bulbs. It's called the Chinese ground orchid, and it blooms in the spring around about April with these lovely, it's a true orchid with these lovely purple orchid flowers. But the interesting thing is while most of the spring flowering bulbs then go dormant, the Chinese ground orchid actually persists with its foliage through the year, and it will keep this beautiful foliage through the summer. It starts to go dormant in October, November. You cut it back and it stays dormant, and then it comes up and starts to grow around about March and blooms in April, and it just makes a beautiful, beautiful job. So what I'd recommend is, if you can find plants of this right now, feel free to plant it in your garden right now. Cut it back, it'll go dormant, but every year it's going to very reliably rebloom for you. It likes partial shades, one of the bulbs that likes a shadier situation, and again, the foliage gets much larger and more robust than this once the plant's in the ground in the garden. But a super spring flowering bulb, you may find plants still available at the nurseries, and if you can, boy, get those things in the ground for spring
and
blooming.
especially you may find them on clearance. If you look at this time of year, you may run across a bargain. There's a lovely clump of these in South Lafayette that's growing right at the drip line of a tree that everybody waits for every year.
Oh, that's a great plant. It also comes in white, but that's a little bit rare.
This is the white.
Oh, you have the white one there? That's a nice one.
Yeah, it's a sweetie.
Well, we got our spider lilies, hurricane lilies, and naked ladies are all applied to this particular plant right here. Now, you've got this as an Amaryllis species, so this is a little different from the Lycoris that we normally grow.
I think that's just a
fell-in
label. Yeah, no.
And here is the real label. It says Lycoris right on
yes,
it.
there we go.
Well, I knew my eyes weren't deceiving me here. Now, they're a fall-blooming bulb, and I'm glad you brought them in. They've already started to send up their new growth, but if you have friends that have these and you admired them in their yard, you may dig them now. It's still the early part of their growing season, and with the foliage up, you know where the bulbs are. And so if you had a friend that would be willing to share them with you, you can actually get these now, dig them up, separate them, and plant some in your garden. And it's a lovely, gorgeous, red-flowered, September, October blooming bulb in our area that if you can grow something named Naked Ladies, it's just such a fun thing to have.
It is to tell people.
Tell people, come on out.
And now these, and several of these bulbs, and that was a clue to remind me to mention it, they are available here now in bagged bulbs. But a lot of these bulbs, if you're transplanting them, if you get in a start, you need to allow a couple of years for them to get happy again. They're not going to be an instant club, and especially these pout when you move them. But in 2 years, they're going to be settling in, and by that third year, they're going to be, running and blooming, beautifully. So don't be disappointed. Just give them a little bit of time, and we're going to put them. We need to talk a little bit about your bed preparation for any of these bulbs.
Well, they appreciate some good bed preparation. Number one, most bulbs are going to need a well-drained area, so avoid the really low, damp areas in your yard. Raised beds are superb for most bulbs. There are a few bulbs that will take some dampness, but really, generally, some good drainage. I like to till the soil up and break it up really well, and whenever I do bed preparation, I always add organic matter. So homemade compost is by far and away the best organic matter, but you can purchase compost if you need to. You can get compost from municipal sources, or you can buy bagged manure. I mean, rake up your leaves, chop them up, and compost them for a little while. They're all kinds of things, but about a 2 to 4 inch layer. A light sprinkling of an all-purpose fertilizer, thoroughly incorporate that into the soil, and you're ready to plant. The best bed preparation is particularly important for the bulbs you expect to bloom for years to come. Tulips appreciate that extra bed preparation, but since you've been yanking them out, it's not quite as critical. As far as sun goes, they prefer to have sun through the day. Now, you can plant these bulbs under deciduous trees because they will drop their leaves in the wintertime. The bulbs get full sun all winter long, and then when the bulbs go dormant in summer, the trees leaf back out. So if they're deciduous shade, you can plant these in shady beds as long as it'll be sunny in the wintertime. But avoid deeply shaded sides of your house or under evergreen trees if you want the bulbs to rebloom well. They need to have at least 2/3 to half a day of sun at the very least. I do like to put bulbs where they get a little afternoon shade, however. I find if the spring turns out hot, that afternoon shade helps the flowers last a little bit longer.
Just to keep the color and keep the foliage and the bloom both pretty. Now, we have briefly a little bit of more time, and we couldn't not mention the Amaryllis because we were talking earlier about, tulip envy. You see any gardening book you pick up at this time of year is going to have a beautiful, article on tulips. And we have our own tulip replacement in Amaryllises, and they are wonderful, long lived. These Amaryllises will grow under not even deciduous trees. I've got them growing under live oak trees. You know, if you can find a little pocket of dirt where you get some a little sunlight in there, they will do wonderfully and last, you know, years and years and years. This is a new one, San Antonio Rose Amaryllis, that has some maroon to the foliage and an absolutely gorgeous rose pink bloom, and it makes pups tremendously. You will have some of these to share with neighbors. You want to keep it pot bound if you want it to make these pups. Don't put it in a big pot. Keep it, you know, pot bound so it starts making pups so you can fill up a bed.
Now, the amaryllises that people actually be buying this time of the year are not going to be an active growth.
No.
But we have to buy amaryllises now, even though we don't plant them into the garden now. When they're dried off and forced to go dormant like this, it triggers them to bloom during the winter time. Well, we don't want the flowers out there in December or January getting damaged by the cold. So when you buy your amaryllises this first year, you want to take the bulb and just pot it up. This would probably be big enough, a little bit bigger pot than this for a bulb like this. Pot it up, put it in a sunny window, grow it in a sunny spot with water. When it blooms, enjoy it, cut the flower stalk off when it's finished, and then take the plant and plant it into the garden in April, and it'll bloom for you every year in April.
And it's going to take, you know, a year or two to get acclimatized. But whatever bulbs you choose,
Keep talking. Keep rolling.
just plant some bulbs. We thank you for being with us, Dan. Don't forget, Dan's books also make wonderful gifts for the holidays.